When you dig into how power really works in Washington, a pretty startling picture emerges. It turns out the modern US president has way more power than the Constitution originally intended, basically ruling through this massive bureaucratic machine. So the big question is, how on earth did we get here? How did the presidency get this powerful? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down.
And this quote from our source material, it just nails the central conflict we're looking at. You've got a president who has this incredible power to act alone, but at the same time, the system itself is starting to wake up and push back hard.
So yeah, these are the two big questions, right? How did this happen and where are we headed? To get to the bottom of it, we've got to look at the actual blueprint of American democracy and find the cracks in the foundation that let all this power shift in the first place.
Okay, so to help us wrap our heads around this whole thing, we're going to use a metaphor that comes straight from our research. Let's think of the government as the American democracy building, and we're going to start by looking at the original architectural plans.
As you can see, this design wasn't an accident. It's super intentional. You've got each branch of government on its own floor. Congress making the laws, the president executing them, and the judiciary interpreting them. The whole point is to create checks and balances so that no single part of the government can get too big for its britches. This is the ideal, right? This is how it's supposed to work on paper.
But here's the thing. This building is under some serious stress. Our investigation found that there are weak spots, entry points on every single floor that have been exploited to consolidate power. And get this, the first breach wasn't some external attack. It was an inside job.
So let's head over to the legislative floor, where Congress lives. This is where the whole breakdown starts, and it's not because of some hostile takeover. It's because Congress basically just handed over the keys.
And here's the crucial difference. Instead of writing a clear law like the speed limit is 55 miles per hour, Congress often passes these super vague laws that just say something like, hey, go ensure road safety. They're basically saying, do something about this problem, but they leave the how completely up for grabs. It's a practice called legislative abdication, and it's like handing a signed blank check to the executive branch.
And that blank check, it gives rise to this massive thing called the administrative state. It's this sprawling web of hundreds of federal agencies. People call it the fourth branch of government. And here's the kicker. Nobody ever votes for them. They take those vague goals from Congress and turn them into thousands of pages of rules that we all have to follow. So Congress's inaction creates this huge power vacuum, and this unelected bureaucracy rushes in to fill it. Which brings us to the person who runs the whole show.
Now we're heading up to the executive floor. With Congress pretty much checked out, the president has been more than happy to grab that power, using the administrative state as a massive engine to govern by decree.
And this timeline really tells the story of how this power grew bit by bit over decades. It kicked off with the New Deal in the 30s, but the real game changer was a 1984 Supreme Court decision called Chevron deference. This basically said courts had to bow down to any reasonable interpretation of a law by an agency. I mean, that just supercharged their power. For 40 years, that decision let power flow like a fire hose, straight to the executive branch.
So here's the playbook. The president shoots out an executive order with a big, broad goal. The agencies then use their rulemaking power to write all the nitty-gritty details, creating literally tens of thousands of pages of regulations that have the exact same force as laws. It's basically a legislative conveyor belt running right out of the White House, completely bypassing Congress.
And you want a perfect example? Look at the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. Our sources show it was created in 2025 with just a single executive order. Think about that. With the stroke of a pen, the president created a whole new department with the power to tear down or rebuild other parts of the government. The takeaway is simple. The modern president can now act like a lawmaker, building and breaking government whenever they want.
But look, a power grab this big doesn't happen in a vacuum. It turns out one of the building's main security guards, the political party system, got turned from an institution with its own ideas into a personal tool for the person in charge.
Our investigation found a complete transformation inside the Republican Party. I mean, just look at this table. It's night and day. Core principles that have been around for decades were just tossed out. Free trade became protectionism. Alliances like NATO, which used to be sacred, suddenly had strings attached. Even the idea of an independent Justice Department was challenged. The new operating principle behind everything? Personal loyalty to one person. So you're probably asking, how did they actually pull this off? Well, it was a structural takeover. In March 2024, the Republican National Committee was basically fused with the Trump campaign. Family members were put in charge, over 60 experienced people got fired in what insiders called a bloodbath, and new hires were literally asked a loyalty test question: do you believe the 2020 election was stolen?
And that's the crucial point. When a major political party goes from being a guardian of how things are supposed to work to being a personal tool, one of the biggest checks on executive power just evaporates. But just as that power seems to be at its absolute peak, the democracy building's original alarm systems start to go off. So let's head up to the top floor, the judiciary, where the constitutional firewalls are finally kicking in.
So how does the system fight back? Well, the Constitution has these built-in safety features. Think of them like firewalls or an emergency sprinkler system. First, Congress controls the money, so they can just cut off funding to agencies created by decree. Second, the Supreme Court has this thing called the Major Questions Doctrine, which says agencies can't make massive policy changes without explicit permission from Congress. And of course, the big one, courts can just flat out declare an executive action unconstitutional.
And this brings us to the biggest move of all. Remember that Chevron deference thing we talked about? For 40 years, it forced courts to go along with whatever the agencies said a law meant. But in 2024, bam, the Supreme Court's Loper-Bright ruling completely overturned it. The court basically said from now on, we, the courts, will say what the law is, not the bureaucrats.
This ruling was like taking a sledgehammer to a padlock. It took away the blank check that agencies have been cashing for decades. It was a fundamental rewiring of power, taking the keys back from the executive branch and giving them to the courts.
Okay, so after looking at the break-ins, the power grabs, and the massive pushback, where does that leave us? What's the final verdict on the state of the American system?
The verdict is this: the American democracy building has taken a real beating. There's no doubt about it. Its weak spots have been exploited on every level. But, and this is a big but, its original defenses, those constitutional firewalls, are not broken. In fact, they are fired up and actively fighting to restore balance.
So at the end of the day, this is the battlefield. On one side, you have a super-empowered executive branch. On the other, you have a reawakened judiciary that's dusting off the Constitution's rulebook. And this isn't some academic debate. This battle is happening right now, and it's defining the future of American democracy.
And that brings us to the final thought we want to leave you with. This isn't a history lesson. This is a live stress test on the entire system. In the question of whether these foundations will hold up under all this pressure, well, that's being answered as we speak.
We put this entire explainer together based on some really extensive research from the sources you see right here. If you want to go even deeper on this, we seriously encourage you to check them out. Thanks for joining us.